we're going to start off with my first experience with Chinese. Way back in about 1989, 1990, in a college that I was working at in Sydney. The Burns Phil is a shipping company in Sydney in the Asia Pacific, in the Pacific, Southeast Asian Pacific, were the agents for the Minghua cruise ship. It's a Chinese cruise ship called the Minghua, and they were having lots of tours out to Japan, to Fiji, New Caledonia, Vanuatu, and all around the Pacific. So it was about a 10-day cruise, and they would come back. And they were at the college that I was working at the time, and they came into the bakery kitchen and said, "Oh, we need somebody perhaps to come and work on this ship to help us improve our afternoon tea. Because we're just using biscuits now, we should be using cakes." So I said, "Okay, that sounds like a good idea for me." I always wanted to work on a ship. It was one of my ambitions when I left Australia in 1967 and went to United Kingdom in London, and I went there with the objective to work on ships. But I didn't get any ship work, a lot of unemployment there at the time. So this was the closest thing to it. So on the baking journey beyond Asia. This is my first experience with Chinese culture, and this fella here is the head chef, and these are the two pastry bakers in the pastry kitchen. And the chef used to come up to the galley every morning at 11:30 and bring me a can of Chinese beer and a bowl of soup each morning that I was on the cruise. And I was there for 2 cruises. I went the first cruise I went with my family, and the second I went a few weeks later by myself. And after we finished the first cruise, I said to one of the fellows on board, as an Australian guy, I said, "Do you think will they follow what I taught them when I was here?" And he said, "Well, when you come back in 2 weeks' time, if they're still doing what you showed them, then they must have said it was okay." So 2 weeks later, or 3 weeks later, I went back again, and they were using the ideas that I'd given to them, and we'd improved our sales of afternoon tea fancies to about 30 dozen of it every day, and we did not everything perfectly, but we did some very good stuff. And these are the pastry people I worked with, and these are the fellas in the bread section. There's the bread bakery and the bread section there. They're hard workers, and I realised I didn't really miss much of not working on a ship, because it's hard work, hot, and rough weather, whether you've got to work on the ship. It's not very nice at all. So that was my first experience with the Chinese culture. And at the same time, I was doing a diploma in teaching at university, because I went and joined TAFE College. Am I speaking too quickly? And you want?
Yeah, no idea.
No, well, they can't understand. Can you follow me? One of my lecturer in my cohort in the university was a Labor supporter. It's a political supporter in Australia, and Australia had just recognised China, and Australia was one of the first countries apart from America to do so. And I wrote I had an essay. I had to write an essay on China. I wrote an essay on China, and I got a high distinction. And I was amazed at the high distinction, because I never got any of that at school. And that sort of made me more interested in the Chinese culture. And then what happened was, a friend of mine in Sydney came to me and asked me, would I be interested to help a local Chinese guy who immigrated to Australia, who wants to set up a bakery in Suzhou and Wuxi. And he will take all the equipment up there, and you'll train the people, and we're not going to. It's not a paid job, but it's an experience. I said, well, okay, it was in my school holiday times, which was 6 weeks holiday at Christmas time. So I went to China. I went to mainland China, and we set up this fellow set up a bakery in Suzhou, in an old factory, in a very old part of Suzhou. And we made pastries and we made cakes, and we had a lot of interesting times together. and they had another outlet in Suzhou, in Wuxi. Wuxi was about a mile up the road. So we would do work in Suzhou, and the next day we'd get in a car and go up to Wuxi. And in Wuxi they rented a space in an old restaurant, and it was renovated in the restaurant. They renovated that, and so we set up bakeries in both of those areas. And this is just a picture of Suzhou at the time. Suzhou was a 2,500 years old city on the Silk Road to China, and it was not modernised in those days. This is just before Singapore went to Suzhou and built a Suzhou town working thing. I was there just before that, or around about the same time.
Before Suzhou here.
Yeah, it was Suzhou there. So this fellow wanted to set up a Western bakery in Suzhou, and my job was to try to train these people into making stuff. But I was given instructions. It's like, I don't have, if we pick the people out, I don't have you and you, I don't talk to you about the same thing at the same time. I said, why not? He said, well, I don't want you or you to know everything there is, because you might go off and start a bakery. So I said, well, look, my approach, the Western approach is, I want to show you how to make a loaf of bread. I need to show you how to make a loaf of bread. You're going to have to make the loaf of bread, and you're going to have to have a lot of practice to make the loaf of bread. Right? So we were at some of the loggerheads there at times, but this factory had one tap, and it was not inside the workshop. It was outside, and at certain times during the year, one morning I went up there, we didn't have any water because it had been freezing overnight, and the water had frozen, so we couldn't do anything because we couldn't get any water. And we had different fats. We bought all the equipment we bought from Australia, took it up by container load, ovens, mixers, and the various things like that. And we set it up in the bakery. And we hadn't set it up very long, and then the ovens broke down. And there was something wrong with the way it had been wired up. The switches were not correct. And so we're thinking, maybe you've got to go back to Australia to get something that flies plus up. And on my way to walking to the bakery every morning, I went past the General Electric factory. So I said to the fellow, look, I'm down the street, there's a General Electric. Why don't you go down and ask the man there? They might have somebody in there who can help you. Sure enough, they went and saw him, and that then became he was the official electrician for the company, and we solved our problems. But trying to do things in the bakery in Suzhou and Wuxi was very difficult. There was no hot water. And one day I needed hot water to do something, and it took forever to get the hot water. And they came back with a thermos flask of hot water. And I thought, they came back with thermos flask of hot water because they don't have any hot water system. So had we known that, we could have put a hot water service in here to do that. But so it was little things like that you have to understand. We were using bakery fats, local bakery fats made in Shanghai from companies that would make the similar type of product we have in Australia. But some of those products, like butter, has got to be at a certain temperature to really use properly. But overnight, the temperature in this bakery would go down to 0. So the fat sitting on the floor would be like a brick. So that's where I got the idea that I'd use hot water to melt it down here, and I would get it to do something. And then one of the workers said to me, why don't we put the butter in the proving box? There's a proving room, a hot room. So we said, if we put the butter in here, it'll soften down overnight. When we come in the morning, we can use it. And I didn't think about it. I said, that's a good idea. So we did that. But they wanted it to proof the bread, so then we had to take the butter out and stick it in the bakery. And when we got to go to use that later on in the day, it gone back to hardness. Right? So we had to overcome those sort of problems.
It's a winter time, is it?
This was in January, December, January, in Shanghai. And up in Wuxi, he said to me, I'll put a heater in the room where the fat is, and I thought, oh, that's good. He said, but we're going to have to turn it off at night time. So what's the point of putting a heater on, turn off at night time, because in the early hours of the morning it gets very cold. Anyway, so we did what we could do there. And one particular day, I'm showing the students what to do there, and one of the students leant up against the windowsill and pushed his hand on the windowsill, and we're 3 stories up, and this thing fell out, smashed to the floor, and I went ballistic because cold air will come in, and they laughed because it was funny. It was funny. So we have to learn to do other things, and we'll show you a photograph in a minute now where in some of the places the inside temperature was 4 degrees Celsius. That's the working conditions, not 26 or 16, but 4 degrees Celsius. So that was around Suzhou.